And with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Jason Hafstad, trustee of the New Jersey Mycological Association, as well as Preserve Manager and Ecologist for the New Jersey Natural Lands Trust, who's going to start us off perfectly with a weird fungi of New Jersey. I want to just say one last thing is I was recently on a field members only field trip with Jared Rosenbaum in Musconetcong Gorge. It was a collaboration with the Torrey Botanical Society, the oldest botanical society in the country. And somebody I was presenting, who was speaking at the conference, somebody just couldn't contain themselves and said, "Jason is great." He led some tours for us. Jason's fantastic. So, Jason, take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Cosmos. Let me share my screen. It says sharing's not turned on, but I can send a request. Okay. Hi, everybody. Let's move this around. So I'm going to give a presentation on weird fungi of New Jersey. My background is primarily in botany, but I've been studying fungi for the past several years. Fungi are not plants, they're in a different kingdom, but they do interact with plants, and it's difficult to ignore all the fungi in our natural world while out botanizing looking for plants. So if you're interested in plants, it's kind of difficult to uh, not also look at fungi. So fungi are not capable of photosynthesis. Um, Plants can photosynthesize. Animals are capable of locomotion and they can move around and hunt or forage. But fungi can do neither. So fungi need to develop strategies to obtain energy. And they've developed a number of different strategies. One of them are mycorrhizal fungi. So these are fungi that uh, interact with plants, trees, but also herbaceous shrubs and herbs, orchids, but largely trees. The trees will photosynthesize, send that photosynthate down into the roots, and then trade with the fungus. The fungus will receive that glucose, and the fungus will break down soil and provide water and nutrients to the plant. Uh, Most of the mycorrhizal fungi, all of the mycorrhizal fungi have mycelium. So when you see a mushroom pop up out of the ground, that's just the fruiting body. The actual body of the fungus is underground. So here we have three examples of mycorrhizal fungi. On the left, we have uh, a bolete, Boletus olivosporus. That's mycorrhizal with pine, pretty common in the pine barrens. Uh, the second one is Amanita, something in the Amanita amerirubescens group. We used to call these all Amanita rubescens, but that's a European name, and it turns out that what we have in North America is multiple species. So taxonomy is still working out. And then the third one there is the blue Entoloma indigoferum, which grows with Atlantic white cedar. So all of these species have a mutualistic relationship with plants. Both the fungus and the plant benefit from this relationship. There are also saprobic fungi. These are fungi that break down dead plant material, often wood, like logs or snags, but also leaf litter. On the left there, we have Mycena leyana, which decomposes hardwood. In the middle there, we have what used to be called Clavaria zollingeri, but again, recent taxonomy shows that in North America we have a different species than what's in Europe. So that's Clavaria amethystina, which almost always is found growing under hardwoods. And then that third photo on the right is something that people likely recognize as chicken of the woods, Latoporus sulphureus, which is kind of an oddball because it does break down and decompose hardwoods, especially oaks. Um, but it may also be parasitic. So it may actually colonize the oaks before the oak dies and actually contribute to the oaks dying. Um, Key ID feature for chicken of the woods is that it's a polypore. The undersides of the brackets have pores. They're typically yellow, and that will help you distinguish it from some things that you may confuse it with. The third strategy that fungi use to obtain energy are parasites. So on the left, we have a leaf spot disease, Mycospirella colorata, that is a specialist on mountain laurel. In the middle, we have rhododendron bud blight. That's the black hair-like structures with that tiny capitate ends. Let's see if I can zoom in on it so you can see it. In the middle there. So it's parasitizing the terminal flower bud of azalea shrubs. And then on the right, we have Acanthamyces, which is a parasite on adult moths. And it engulfs the moth with this white mycelium. It even affixes the host to a surface, and then it sprouts these spikes that have propagules that then get released to infect more moths. So all three of these species are fungi, parasitic fungi that are native to New Jersey, even though they infect and kill other native species. They evolved here and they're just as much part of our natural heritage as the hosts they infect. Now, there are parasitic fungi that are invasive, and introduced fungi that are parasitic probably have a predisposition to becoming invasive because they do kill their host, or often they kill their host. So, chestnut blight and beech bark disease are two examples of introduced parasitic fungi that are invasive, but that doesn't mean that all parasitic fungi in New Jersey are bad. And then the last strategy that fungi use to obtain energy are lichens. So lichens are a composite organism of a fungus and a photosynthesizing partner. This can be either an algae or a cyanobacteria. In rare cases, it can be both. But despite this being a composite organism, we classify lichens by their fungal partner. So on the left, we have a species of Physia. In the middle, we have the British soldier lichens, Cladonia cristatella. And then on the right, we have an Usnea, an old man's beard, probably Usnea mutabilis. And this one actually has the egg casing of an ichneumon wasp, I believe, Charaps and Ulysses. So overview of fungi. I like to think of fungi by their ecology and how they obtain energy, and I'll try to note what some of the preceding fungi's ecology is. But moving into some of the weird species of New Jersey, I'll start off with the dead man's fingers, which is a saprobe. It is typically found on hardwood stumps and logs, although it's often appearing terrestrial because it's decomposing buried wood. As the scientific name suggests, polymorpha, it has many forms. So it doesn't always look like a dead man's hand rising out of the ground, but um, when you find it, it's usually pretty peculiar looking. But other than its appearance and its fun name, there's not much weird about it being a saprobe that breaks down wood. However, there is a related species in the same genus that has an even weirder ecology. That is Xylaria liquid ambar, the sweet gum fruit fungus. This is a Xylaria species that breaks down only sweet gum fruits. And it's something that you're not likely to see unless you know it exists and you go looking for it. If you find a sweet gum forest and you start looking at the sweet gum fruits that have fallen on the forest floor, especially in wetter areas, swampy habitats, um, you're likely to find it. It's not rare in New Jersey. It may take you a while to find it, but once you get an eye for what it looks like, uh, you should be able to find it pretty reliably. Also, a species that you are unlikely to see unless you know it exists, you go looking for it, are the pine pumpkins, Zithia resinae. This is a fungus that colonizes the dried sap of conifers, often pine. I often see it on eastern white pine. I've also seen it on pitch pine. I've even seen it on Atlantic white cedar. But if you see this dried white uh, resin or sap on a conifer, and you look closely, be careful not to get sticky resin on your fingers. Um, Helps if you have a hand lens or a loop, but you might find the pine pumpkins. So this is not a fungus. This is a moss, the haircap moss. We have several species of Polytrichum in New Jersey. Um, those of you who know moss life cycles know that there is a haploid stage and a diploid stage. So the diploid stage is when it has the capsules that release the spores, usually later in the season. But in the spring, it produces these structures that are either male or female. It's got the antheridium, which are male, and the archegonium, which are female. Um, and if you look at these closely, you might find a fungus, Lizonia and Paragonia. This is a fungus that only colonizes the male antheridia of Polytrichum, only Polytrichum, highly specialized. It creates these black perithecia shaped fruiting structures that have these spores on the inside. Um, This is not a species that has been reported from New Jersey yet, but it's something that is that I would like to find. I just learned about this species recently. I found it up in New York, in the Adirondacks. Shout out to Bill Buck for finding, recognizing it. Um, it doesn't seem to be super common in North America. The records that we do have tend to be higher elevation. So if you want to go looking for this thing, I would start with some of the mountain ridges, High Point, Mount Tammany. You look for Polytrichum and you look for the Antheridia cups. And if you see these black perithecia, then it's likely a Lizonia. And if you want to get it to species, you have to do some microscopy and measure spores. But this would be a really cool thing to add to the New Jersey fungal checklist. So if you find it, please let me know. Another example of a rare fungus that's highly specialized on bryophytes that has not been found from New Jersey yet, but has been found in nearby Pennsylvania. It was discovered last year by Noah Yon. This is Laurelea marcantia, which grows on the liverworts, Marcantia polymorpha. Um, More common out in the Pacific Northwest and over in Europe, but likely a rare species in the eastern part of the country, and is something that, again, if found, likely be a rare species in New Jersey, and it's something that people should be keeping an eye out for. This species is a lot more common. This is another Bryophilus fungus that parasitizes moss. This is Eocarnartium massicola, moss rust, which grows on a number of different moss genera. Uh, this one I found growing on moss on a rock in a stone wall up in North Jersey. But if you see this, it is a moss parasite. Last example of a parasitic Bryophilus fungus. This is the sphagnum grayling. This is a little brown mushroom that parasitizes living sphagnum. Often see it in the pine barrens and Atlantic white cedar swamps. If you see a patch of light brown dying sphagnum. It could be dying because it was parasitized by Sphagnurus paluster. It could also be because it was peed on by deer. If you smell it, you can usually determine which is the case. If you see these little brown mushrooms sprouting out of that dead patch, then it's likely dead by parasitized by Sphagnurus paluster. Um, you can see it also has this fuzzy white base on the stem of the Sphagnurus that can help ID it. Here's a timely example of a weird fungus, Eastern American jack-o'-lantern, Omphalodus illudens. This is a saprobe. It breaks down hardwoods, especially oaks. You can see it grows on logs and it's bright orange, so it can be confused with chicken of the woods by an experienced mushroomer. Uh, but if you recall, chicken of the woods is a polypore. It has yellow pores on the underside, and this species has gills, which is something you want to keep in mind because this species is poisonous to eat. But the thing that makes it weird is that it's bioluminescent. So here is a long exposure shot from Tommy McCarthy uh, of the bioluminescent Eastern American jack-o'-lantern. Uh, doesn't often look like this in person. This is a long exposure shot, but if you go out into the forest, especially on a night that doesn't have a lot of light pollution, like a new moon, you gotta let your eyes adjust, but you can find these bioluminescent mushrooms, but they're a lot more charismatic if you photograph them with a long exposure photo. This is one people probably recognize. This is Gymnosporangium juniperi virginiana, juniper apple rust. Overwinters as galls on eastern red cedars, and then in the spring, those galls produce these bright orange gelatinous helial horns that release spores that then land on and create a leaf spot type uh, fungus on apples or other species in the rose family. It's not harmful to junipers, but it can significantly weaken apples, and it's kind of a bane of apple orchards. Often, apple orchards will try to remove all of the eastern red cedar to protect their uh, apple yield. But weird because it has alternating hosts. You know, it jumps from juniper, then to rosaceae, then back to juniper. Uh, Another example of a species that is has alternating hosts is the pine oak gall rust. As the name suggests, alternating between pines and oaks. Typically colonizes 2 and 3 needle pines, so you're unlikely to find it on eastern white pine. That's a 5 needle pine. And then it typically colonizes oaks in the red oak group for its other alternate host. And then again, alternates back and forth between these two hosts. This is an example of a fungus that is pyrophilous or fire loving. It's a species that shows up often after fire. Um, it's parasitic on conifer seedlings. Here you can see a photo on the left by Bob Moyer taken this year in the vicinity of Forked River after the Jones Road wildfire, 15,000 acres back in April. Here's another pyrophilous fungus, Foliota highlandensis. This one is saprobic, the bases of charred trees, grows from burned woods. This is a species that you'll often find after fire. So these photos taken by Brandon were taken back in December 2024 at Black Run Preserve in Isham after they had a fire. You'll notice too that uh, this mushroom has gills. So I've mentioned a little bit about uh, spore producing structures on fungi. Um, if that underside of the cap was flat, it wouldn't be able to release as many spores as it would if it had gills. So the gills are just a structure that's meant to maximize the surface area that is exposed. Spores are going to be produced and released along the face of those gills. Same strategy for pores. Pores are just the terminal end of tubes. So inside the tubes, spores are getting released, and it's again just trying to maximize the amount of spores that are able to be released at once. Um, that structure on the underside of the cap is called the hymenium. So sometimes the hymenium is gilled, sometimes it's pored, sometimes it has teeth. We'll see an example of a toothed mushroom in a minute. Um, but not all mushrooms create spores on this kind of external hymenium. Some mushrooms have what's called a gleba. So here's an example of the stinkhorn. The spores are produced on the terminal end of this weird shaped fungus. And then the gleba is this sticky, brown, stinky substance on the end. It emits a strong odor to attract flies, and then the flies will pick up spores and disperse them. This is a saprobic species. It breaks down wood, uh, maybe also leaf litter, often found in the forest. It could also be in flower beds or mulch lawns. Um, but the production of that gleba, the spore-bearing tissue um, on the outside of the structure, separates this from mushrooms that have gills, pores, or teeth. Um, Lots of mushrooms have a gleba. A lot of mushrooms express their gleba in different ways. Another example of a internal spore producing mushroom are puffballs. This is the red slimy stalked puffball. It's called a puffball because it's a ball, and if you pinch those balls, it releases a puff of spores through the terminal hole. Um, these are puffballs because of the overall shape of the fungus, but are kind of false puffballs because true puffballs are in the genus Lycopterodon, and those are saprobes. This is mycorrhizal, and it turns out this species is not closely related to the true puffballs in the genus Lycopterodon. Calostomas are actually more closely related to boletes, and boletes are often mycorrhizal as well. That gelatinous coating is thought to deter insect predation. Can also help keep the fungus moist after a rain. But quite an unusual looking species. We have at least three species of Calostoma in New Jersey. This is the only one that is gelatinous. We also have Calostoma lutescens, which is yellow, tends to have this lattice base. Um, and this is called the collared calostoma because around the base of the puffball, as it opens up, it creates this collar. There's a similar looking third species, Calostoma ravenellii, um, that doesn't have that collar. It's much less common than lutescens. Uh, Another example of a mushroom with a gleba is Scleroderma citrinum, common earth ball. Uh, Unlike the puffballs and like a paradon and the calostomas, this species doesn't have a terminal hole. So even though it is um, it does have a gleba with internal spore production, once the spores mature, it just kind of breaks apart and breaks down, and the outer wall kind of opens up, and the spores are just released. It doesn't have, like a hole for a puff of spores to come out of. Um, Interestingly, this was named by a very prominent mycologist, the last name Persoon, back in 1801, uh, from Europe. Um, Persoon was largely regarded as one of the founding fathers of mycological taxonomy. Um, Scleroderma is also unusual because, well, it's interesting because it's often found in the same spot every year. So if you find it, you go back to the same spot. It's usually right where you found it the year before. So, it's got a gleba, but the weird thing about this species is that it also has a parasite, a parasitic mushroom, Pseudoboletus parasiticus. This is a bolete that parasitizes only Scleroderma. Uh, Likely parasitic, although the ecology is still not thoroughly understood. It has been observed that in a population of Scleroderma that returns year after year in the same spots, the parasitic bolete uh, consistently colonizes the same Scleroderma year after year. So if it was releasing spores, you would think that it would be colonizing some of the neighboring Scleroderma, but it doesn't seem to. So perhaps the parasitism is in the mycelium, or perhaps something more complex is going on. Uh, but this is a parasite, and uh, boletes are often considered edible. There are a lot of choice edible boletes. Some of them are more bitter, but there are a lot of really choice edible boletes. This one, though, you probably shouldn't eat. It's thought to be edible, but the fact that it's parasitic on Scleroderma, and Scleroderma is considered a poisonous mushroom, so perhaps it's not a good one to try to eat. Um, Side note on edibility of mushrooms, no mushroom is thought to be edible raw. So even chicken in the woods and choice edibles, they should all be cooked before eating. Here's another weird one. The fluted bird's nest, Cyanthus striatus. You can see the fluted inside of the cup. Those bird egg shaped structures on the inside are called peridioles, and they contain spores. And when a water droplet lands in the cup at the right angle, it launches that peridiole into the air, and there's a long string attached to each of the peridioles called a funiculus, and that attaches to nearby vegetation. And then the peridiole kind of just dangles and releases spores from a higher elevation. That peridiole is another example of a gleba. Again, no gills, no pores, they're internal spore production, but just weird evolution, kind of like puffballs. It's this little container of spores, and this one just happens to have this mechanism of getting launched into the air and then releasing those spores from higher elevation, a couple feet, a couple inches maybe. Um, some mushrooms grow on dung. This is the dung-loving inky cat, Coprinus decoria. Uh, First described in 1786. Mycologists described this species before the Scleroderma citrinum, which I thought was interesting. Um, Found on dung, especially dung of herbivores, although it's also been found on bear or dog dung. The photo on the left is a photo that I took in Sussex County. I assume I think it's likely it's Coprinopsis decoria, although I wasn't equipped to collect it and actually key it out. But there's a whole host of fungi that grow on dung. that are likely overlooked and not very well understood. Um, oh, and by the way, a lot of the literature mentions that this species, the edibility is unclear, in case anybody was curious. Uh, Here's another weird one that you probably have seen, at least the mycelium of this fungus. If you've ever walked through the woods and seen like a blue-green stained uh, piece of rotting wood, that's the mycelium of Chlorosiboria. We have two species in New Jersey, aruginascens and aruginosa. Aruginosa has smaller spores. Um, the stained wood is actually pretty common. You'll see this, especially in forests that have black birch. Um, I haven't read anything about the species having any preferential hosts, but when I see it, I look up and I often see black birch. You're more likely to see the stained wood than you are the fruiting structures. So if you want to see the species, especially fruiting structures, uh, perhaps you should visit a nearby forest with black birch. Uh, Here's an example of a toothed mushroom, Hydnellum ceruleum. You can see it exudes this jelly-like substance. That's a process called guttation. We're not sure why some mushrooms gutate, possibly to deter herbivory or to maintain moisture. But um, this is a mycorrhizal species with pine. Again, those teeth or spines are just a strategy to try to maximize the surface area that is available for spore dispersal. Um, you can see the distribution map on the left. It's much more common to the north and to the south. And then there's this, what I call mid-Atlantic void in the middle, which is a feature that I see a lot with rare lichens, especially lichens or other species that have an affinity to old growth forests. Um, the species may or may not be associated with old growth forests. I only know of two locations in New Jersey where this has been found. It's likely rare in New Jersey, but it's in the family Bankeraceae, and I've heard anecdotally that um, Bankeraceae species in the family Bankeraceae tend to have a higher diversity in old growth forests. So finding a species of Bankeraceae is probably not indicative of an old growth forest, but finding lots of species in the family Bankeraceae is. And the fact that this species appears to be rare in New Jersey and has that mid-Atlantic void makes me think that this is probably a species that has some affinity to forests that have uh, long continuity or low amount of disturbance historically. I just want to zoom in on this photo on the bottom right because it's really a fantastic photo from my naturalist. Super bizarre looking species. Um, this is a species that will not always look this photogenic. So not only is this species rare to find, period, but it's also, if you do find it, it's likely not to be this fresh and charismatic. So finding a species, this species in New Jersey, especially, uh, as fresh as this would be, exceptionally rare. Again, mycorrhizal with pine. Sticking with the theme of blue mushrooms, this is Lactarius indigo, indigo milkcap. Uh, Species in the genus Lactarius, as the genus name suggests, exude a milky substance when bruised. So you can see in the top right photo, if you slice the gills with a knife, it exudes this milk substance. This is the only species of Lactarius that has blue milk in New Jersey. Uh, Oftentimes, Lactarius has white milk or clear milk or yellow milk or white milk that quickly changes to yellow. But all of those features are needed to help identify Bacterius species. We probably have maybe 40 or 50 species of Lactarius in New Jersey. Some of them are more easy to identify than others. You also have to taste the milk. Sometimes it's mild, sometimes it's spicy, like jalapenos, sometimes it has a smell. All of these features are needed for an ID down to species level. They are mycorrhizal with both oaks and pines. Um, and again, that milk is probably a strategy to avoid herbivory, although that seems to be the base case when you can't explain why a fungus does something. Uh, here's an interesting one. Ink cap, Coprinopsis atramentaria, often found in lawns or gardens. It's a saprobe that, again, kind of grows out of buried wood, even though it can appear terrestrial, often like the Xylaria polymorpha, the dead man's fingers. Um, as this species matures, the gills liquefy, and then that kind of causes the cap to curl up, and that kind of exposes the underside of the cap, which is thought to help with spore dispersal. Um, the species is edible when young, but with a big asterisk because it's poisonous if consumed with alcohol. The mushrooms have a substance called coprine, and when coprine is combined with alcohol, it can be poisonous. So you can eat these if they're young, but not with alcohol. So here is a weird genus, Topicladium. So this photo on the left is Topicladium longisegmentatum. Uh, Longisegmentatum is parasitic on a fungus in the genus Elaphomyces, which is a false truffle, kind of this underground puffball-like fungus. We have two other species of Palladium that are also mycoparasites on Elaphomyces. That's Capitatum and Ophioglossoides. So weird, and then just being a fungus that's parasitizing another fungus. But even weirder is Twerpocladium paradoxicum, which is parasitic on cicada nymphs. It was thought that historically, the ancestral Twerpocladium would have evolved as entomoparasites, kind of evolving alongside cordyceps and other insect parasites. But phylogenetic studies suggest that Topicladium, the ancestral Topicladium, were mycoparasites, and then multiple times in evolutionary history, it jumped hosts to insects. So this species, Paradoxicum, is apparently a parasite exclusively on cicada nymphs. It was found by Brandon last year, and in Salem County. It was found just recently again in the Pine Barrens last week by another mycologist. Put an observation up on iNaturalist. Tupacladium has a lot of parasitic species that have very specific hosts. There's another species, Inflatum, that's not known to New Jersey, but is recorded from nearby New York, that is apparently restricted to scarab beetles. There's also a species of Tropicladium that parasitizes a lichen in Antarctica. Oftentimes, parasitic fungi have very specific hosts. Uh, Not always, but oftentimes you get these really interesting evolutionary relationships where you've got a parasitic fungi that is entirely dependent on a small group of host species. Sticking with the cicada theme, you've got the flying salt shakers of death. This is a fungus that infects cicadas and then it creates this spore-bearing structure at the base of the adult cicadas. So when they fly around, they spread the spores and infect other cicadas. So unlike the Tulpicladium that infects and kills the nymphs, this one actually colonizes the cicada and then utilizes their flight path for dispersal. Another parasitic fungus, this one that is a specialist on spiders, Gibellula. Um, the several species of Gibellula, all of them appear, I believe, to be arachnid parasites. Earlier this year, there's a new species of Gibellula described and named after Sir David Attenborough, Gibellula attenboroughii. That was described from Ireland. That species is interesting because it is thought to only parasitize cave spiders. And as you can imagine, trying to disperse your spores inside a cave is not a very good strategy to try to spread to new populations. So it's thought that this is a species that's one of the zombie fungi that affect the behavior of the host because cave spiders infected with Gibellula attenboroughii tend to move to the cave opening prior to death, which enables more efficient spore dispersals by the fungus. So some of you may recognize this photo. These are the boogie woogie aphids or the beach blight aphid, which is a native insect that colonizes or is found on beech trees. It has a fungus that colonizes the honeydew or the poop of the aphids. So if you look underneath the colony of boogie woogie aphids, especially later in the year, you might find this black sooty fungal-like growth that grows exclusively on the honeydew of these aphids that are found on beech trees. Also, interesting side note about boogie woogie aphids. One of their primary predators is the harvester butterfly, the caterpillars of which consume the aphids. This is North America's only carnivorous butterfly. And it appears to be in decline. Not sure if it's related to the loss of beech from beech bark disease and beech leaf disease, but it's an important butterfly to keep an eye out for, especially if you see boogie woogie aphids nearby. So this mossy maze polypore, serene unicolor, looks pretty normal. Looks a lot like Tricaptum or turkey tail. It's got these kind of maze-like underside, kind of these, halfway between teeth and pores, and they're kind of arranged in a maze-like structure. The top is often hairy and also often has algae growing on it. But the interesting thing about this species is that it's got a really interesting relationship with a pigeon horntail that here photographed by John Clark. Female wasps in this genus will use that long, what looks like a stinger, but is actually an ovipositor, to bore into wood and deposit eggs. When it bores into wood that is colonized by Serena, the spores and propagules will get carried from the ovipositor and transported to another piece of deadwood. The eggs of the pigeon horntail will then colonize, and the larvae will consume the fungus, and that is an obligate. If the larvae of the pigeon horntail doesn't have this fungus present, they will die. They absolutely require it to continue being developed. It's unclear, at least to me, whether or not the larvae are actually consuming the mycelium of the fungus, or if they're just using the mycelium to break down the wood and they're consuming the wood. But a really interesting relationship uh, between an insect and a fungus. But it doesn't stop there, because once the fungus starts to break down the wood, it emits a chemical, possibly a pheromone or some type of chemical signal, and it attracts a parasite of the pigeon horntail. So this is a giant ichneumon wasp that will parasitize the larvae of the pigeon horntail. And again, it's got a long ovipositor that will penetrate the wood. It will first paralyze the larvae, and then it will deposit eggs inside the larvae of those pigeon horntails. And this is a parasitoid, meaning it kills its host. So as those eggs develop, it will consume and kill the larvae of the horntail. Um, it's unclear whether or not the fungus is doing this intentionally, you know, whether it wants to, in quotes. Um, it obviously the fungus just wants to get dispersed by the pigeon horntail. So after it's been colonized, it doesn't really need the larvae of the pigeon horntail anymore. Or it just breaks down the wood and emits this chemical signal, and the giant ichneumon wasp is able to pick up on it. But fascinating tripartite story between a fungus, a wood boring wasp, and an ichneumon wasp. So, quick plug for the New Jersey Mycological Association. Most of what I've learned about fungi has been through this club. Um, Members enjoy a lot of benefits, including weekend forays. We get scientific collection permits. We do little mini biodiversity inventories across New Jersey. Here's a map showing the location of all the forays from 2025. On a good year, meaning a wet year, we can find 150 species in a single day. We also have weekly Taxonomy Tuesday Zoom sessions where people can bring mushrooms that they found in their yard or out in the woods, and then we share screens and help each other identify and share cool finds. So if you're interested in learning more about fungi, especially fungi growing in your yard, I highly recommend joining the club. And that's all I got.
Thank you.
Ready for questions if you have any, Randy.
Thank you so much, Jason. That was fabulous. Um, I think I now have some more favorite mushrooms. I think the dung-loving inky cap was a new one on me. I know a few. I know a few mushrooms. Also, being an aphid specialist, finding out that Grylopersiphilus imbricator is actually known as the boogie woogie aphid was new to me. I was not aware of that particular nickname for that. So thank you for that. But we do have some really great questions and about 10 minutes here to address them. One of probably the most overreaching question that came out, which I thought was a really good one, is can you recommend any really good field guides or books or sites for mushroom or fungus ID? Do you have any that you really like?
Yeah, so there's a book by Tim Baroni, Mushrooms of the Northeast. That's pretty good. Mushrooms are so diverse that it's very difficult to get a single book for all fungi. So there are lots, if you want to get into mycology, you're going to have to be willing to spend money on lots of different books that are highly specialized in different groups of fungi. There's a really good bolete book by the Bassett's. The Bassett's are two mycologists that have produced a lot of good field guides that are specialized, just the genus. There's a whole book on Lactarius or the milk mushrooms. There's a whole book on polypores. But if you're just getting started and you just want just like a basic intro, just the species that you're most commonly going to come across, I would start with Tim Baroni's Mushrooms in the Northeast. Um, Websites, there's mushroomexpert.com. That's really good for idea. They have species profiles and they have keys for some. That's run by Michael Quo. Um, If you're interested in boletes, there's a really good website called the Bolete Filter that has like kind of like a multi-access key where you start with, New Jersey and there's 200 boletes, and then you say, all right, the cap is red and it filters, and you just keep going. You pick the attributes that you want till you get down to a manageable size. And then lastly, there's a really good website called Myco Quebec that is in French, but you can use your web browser to translate it to English. Some of the translations, especially of the more technical terms, can get a little wonky, but really excellent photos and information on that website.
Great. Because I know when people start getting into mushrooming, it is very complicated, and they are, the keys are very different, and the characteristics you're looking at are very different than what you might look at typically for plants.
And that's also why the weekly taxonomy Tuesday Zoom sessions are really helpful, because we can kind of walk you through, how do you photograph, what features do you need to look for, and where should you go for this particular group of fungi.
Yes, yes. Sort of a related question. Someone was asking about edible mushrooms, and I know I believe I saw a post the other day that said every mushroom's edible once. But there was when you were talking about let's see here, the Lictorius, the indigo milky cap, you were talking about that group, and that some of the keying characteristics is actually tasting the sap. Um, but mushroom ID is a tricky thing. And a lot of people get themselves in trouble with mushrooms that they think are edible that are not edible every year. Are there particular books on that you might recommend, or any guidance that you give on information about edible mushroom or mushroom foraging in general? Because I know that's a big thing right now.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that all mushrooms are safe to handle. So even highly toxic mushrooms you can touch. Um, there also is no overarching characteristic that will help you identify an edible mushroom from a poisonous one. You can't use color, you can't use texture, you can't use smell. You have to ID it down to species. Uh, there are a small number of choice edibles that are uh, um, sought after because they are easy to identify. There are not a lot of lookalikes. They are edible and they are tasty. Um, I would guess that the majority of mushrooms are edible and that a smaller portion of those are palatable. So most mushrooms you can eat, but a lot of them you probably wouldn't want to. There are certain groups that have poisonous mushrooms in it. So if you learn the edible mushrooms and you learn the poisonous mushrooms, then you're kind of, you've got, a pretty good start. Um, Most of the poisonous mushrooms are poisonous because they cause, the nausea or vomiting, or they're not lethal. There are lethal mushrooms, but not every poisonous mushroom will kill you. One example of one that will kill you is called the destroying angel, which is in the genus Amanita, and it's pure white. So again, you can't use color to get any clues. Um, and even edible mushrooms, like chicken of the woods, certain people just have bad reactions to different types of mushrooms. So the first time anybody eats an edible mushroom, you should take it slow, because you never know how any individual person is going to react. Just because something is often eaten by other people doesn't mean you should consume, bowls and bowls of it. I don't know of any good books on edible mushrooms. Again, just overall ID books are going to be your best bet, and then it usually has information on edibility. Boletes are a really good place to start, because there are a lot of edible boletes. The ones that are not choice are just bitter, and the bolete filter will give you some good information on that. But
So go with caution, and an ID before consuming large quantities, I think is the
yeah,
uh, going to a slightly different subject here, Christine asked about the fire adapted mushrooms, which I thought were also really interesting. Is there a particular trigger, or are there particular nutrients that are available after a fire that allows the mushrooms to grow, or exactly what is the trigger there?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure, especially in the pine barrens. It could be as the fire burns through the upper layer, it exposes, dormant spores. It could be the charred wood or the charcoal somehow providing or making nutrients bioavailable, but I'm not sure what the trigger is. I mean, as an adaptation, it makes sense because after a fire, you've got a whole bunch of dead wood. So, it's this big buffet for the fungi. So, ecologically, it makes sense that there would be some species that specialize in that type of situation. But in terms of what the trigger is, I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Because I think I've actually, in sort of thinking back on, I think I've seen them around old campfire sites and
Hmm.
whatnot, and it just never really occurred to me that it was a fire adapted mushroom species. Um, there was a great question that came in. Let's see here. Was that from Aaron? Are there any interesting evolutionary adaptations of species due to being parasitized by fungi?
Yeah, I mean, parasitism itself, I think, is pretty interesting, but it's this constant, evolutionary battle between, the host and the parasite and, defense mechanisms. Um, but in terms of, a host getting parasitized and then evolving some defense to lose that parasitism, I can't think of any examples. That's probably really difficult to know about because after it is no longer parasitized, it's hard to know that, a million years ago it at one point was.
Yeah, the flying salt shakers of death I thought were particularly interesting because obviously if you kill all of your host, you still need to get your spores dispersed. So sort of a disturbing um, system of
Yeah.
dispersal. Um, Going back really quick to edibles before we get done here, you did mention that um, all mushrooms should be cooked before eaten. And Abby actually came up with a question, does that, I think it was Abby, yes, um, whether or not that also applied to like commercially available mushrooms that you get from the grocery store.
Yeah, a lot of people do recommend that, it's probably not best to consume large amounts of raw portobello mushrooms or store-bought mushrooms. Um, it's probably safer to eat portobellos than some of the other wild mushrooms uncooked. But yeah, I mean, again, it's probably just going to be, stomach discomfort for the most part. You're not going to get poisoned or die from eating raw portobellos, but the human stomach is not really uh, capable of digesting raw mushrooms all that well.
That's really interesting. Um, and I think we have time for just one more question. Um, Again, we keep coming back to edibles apparently. Um, there are, and this kind of, this question comes from Kazis actually, by way of his cat, I see, by Alias. There are a lot of native plants that have a problem with people foraging them, and foraging. I mean, I actually know someone nearby here who has a restraining order out against a neighbor who forages wild mushrooms off their property. Um, is there a problem with the amount, the quantity, the interest in wild foraging? Is that a problem for wild fungus?
Yeah, so when you're picking a fungus, you're picking a fruit. You're leaving behind the body of the mushroom. So as long as you're leaving the mycelium behind, you're not actually picking the organism. There's an adage that mycologists say. I don't know if it's ever been scientifically investigated, but they say that you do more damage to a population walking up to a mushroom than you do picking it because you're crushing the mycelium. Uh, but mushrooms are releasing spores. Obviously that's a critical part of continuing the population. Mushrooms are also important habitat for a lot of insects, so it's advisable that if you are foraging in an area where you have legal permission to forage, you don't pick all of the mushrooms. You leave some behind. You leave some for the maggots, and for spore dispersal. Um, but uh, but yeah, it can be a problem, and it seems kind of silly that we would have so much interest in New Jersey and foraging that we would decimate populations or cause species to be endangered. But we do have what 9 million people living here, so
There are a few. There are a few. Well, thanks so much, Jason. This has been great. We're going to have to cut off the questions there so we can move on to our next speaker. But thank you, Jason, for joining us for Weird New Jersey, Weird New Jersey plants. Even though you were on the fungus line there, so
yeah.
I'm going to turn it back over to Kazis, our president, Kazis Vernellis, so he can introduce our next speaker,